So with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Matt Donovan. As the Vice President of GP Strategies Learning Solutions Group, Matt has over 20 years of experience crafting training and development solutions with a focus on performance-driven learning. He has led the production of over 300 custom online courses for Fortune 500 companies, many of which employ scenario-based approaches focused on reinforcing authentic work practices. Matt has an MS in Instructional Systems Technology from Indiana University, and when he's not working, he is enjoying time with his family. So with that, Matt, I'd like to turn the session over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. Appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys for the next 20 minutes. So I know that Kayla shared a little bit about my background, and I feel it's important to kind of share a little bit more. Obviously, I'm a classically trained instructional designer, but I often refer to myself as a recovering instructional designer. I've been working in the training and performance improvement area for 20 years, and this is what you're going to see today, and as I talk about it, will be coming from that lens. I am not a neuroscientist. I'll tell you that right up front, but I am what I consider been practicing and evolving and changing the way in which we are meeting learners and performers' needs in the designs of our solutions. And I will tell you, over the 20 years, and many of you I'm sure can attest to this, we've definitely learned a lot about some practices that work better than others as we move forward. So it always brings a lot of interest when new topics come to the strategy. So when you have something like brain-based learning or a focus on the neuroscience and learning, it's good to dig in and start thinking about, so what does this mean to the design of effective instruction, driving hopefully towards a transfer to performance. And so what I want to first start off with is why is there a focus or a buzz, or why is this gaining such steam or interest around it? And what we're seeing in our environments is that in the organizations that we're working with, or the folks that we're trying to help support through training or performance improvement, they're operating in organizations. There's blurring lines. People are becoming, very, cross-functional. A lot of their activities, they're dealing with more gray challenges. They're having to do a lot more role expansion. So no longer is it sales separated from marketing. You're now seeing sales and marketing and manufacturing or R&D working together to collaborate to solve that. And in many ways, we're now seeing consumers brought into this. So the landscape of performance is changing. What does it need? What do we need to do in order to survive? So within that, folks are having to learn information and be able to transfer that at a higher rate due to disruption, rates of change around us. So it's a greater emphasis on designs that are going to lead to more effective and more efficient training. So that need has always been there, but it's getting worse as we're moving forward based on the challenges facing that. In addition to that, we're also seeing technological innovations in the science areas to see and observe the brain as it functions at a biochemical, electrochemical level as it's moving forward. So we're starting to get more data. We're actually getting better insight and observations into what's happening in some of the areas. Now, being careful with that, trying to separate out, the deep idea between why everything is happening, but we're at least now able to see new data with that. So it kind of brings me to a vision and a warning with this. So within this one here, you guys may recognize Harold Stolovich. He's the author of Telling Aim Training and Training Aim Performance. But beyond that, Harold is, I have a lot of respect for him in the field. He's a strong proponent of evidence-based practices in the design of learning and performance improvement. And this is from an article, an interview with him where he was talking about brain-based learning, neuroscience, and seeing what's going to happen. And even in that, he talks about that what goes on inside us, we're going to learn more about it, or really around our target audience of our performers. We're going to have that opportunity to learn more. And it's a very optimistic view looking into that. He also cautions us it's not a magic bullet, but it'll help us better understand, again, our target, the learner and the performer. So that's the vision of where we think it can start to go to inform us. But the warning here around this is, as with anything that rolls out, is that when you start to extend an area or new hypotheses or insights, and you start to create an algorithm to design your learning or your performance improvement, that's where things begin to break down. There are studies that are supporting a range of theories. The research is very much in its early stages. If you talk to, and actually they've been on record when talking to neurosciences in the learning space, they'll tell you that we are having a fairly rudimentary understanding of the depth of the brain, but we are seeing more with that. So as we're kind of going through, I want to balance the conversation with it and say there are things that are coming through that we're seeing and being definitely talked about, but we also need to think, and as we move forward to apply it, not to come through and say, well, that's in our designs an algorithm for success. So I want to start off with a vision and a warning, and then point to some really what I consider great resources on this. And when I say it's a great resource, they're good reads. I found them articulate, and they kind of set up the argument from a variety of perspectives. So 3 of them that I have at the top. Now, these are all in that space around brain-based learning or work within that. So I pulled these as examples, and I've read them, and I think they're articulate. They do point to research and the logic behind where they're, the messages are bringing forward. They're fairly well recognized. These are not the the only 3 books out there. I picked 3 that I was familiar with and comfortable with, and I thought that they were a good discussion on that. So Margie and John's books, between Brain Matters and Brain Rules, are good reads to get up to speed with some of the topics. There are other books out there as well. And Your Brain at Work with David Rock and some of the work that he's been doing. There's several books out there and David's done a couple of those. So I would recommend these 3 resources to kind of explore that brain-based learning as you're going through that. Now, another resource I'm putting out here is Will Thalheimer at the bottom here, and Will brings a different perspective around neuroscience, and he's written a blog post, much more, it looks like an article to me, but more of a blog post, and he talks about what the neuroscience research is saying. So this is kind of a good two-side resources for both sides of the argument with this, and I think Will's done a nice job of putting logic and bringing his argument to bear, and I feel that as you guys go forward and bring these things through, to see both sides of the conversation as we're moving forward is great to do. So again, I think it's important to be critical in how we're thinking about these, take the rules as we're moving forward to create solutions with them. We need to understand some of the limitations of that. But the good news is that a lot of what we're seeing is aligned and reinforcing with some great learning principles that many of us have already been adopting into our design. So it's getting reinforced with some of the things that are coming out. But it is, if nothing else, reinforcing some key understandings. Real quick one to just bring in an excerpt of John Medina's Brain Rules here, for example. He's got 12 rules he's kind of brought together, and he's continued to expand his discussion on this. But the ones I've kind of highlighted here in the red boxes are some of those that I think from a design catch my attention as a designer of these experiences, kind of reinforcing that when you're trying to create an experience that's going to connect and hopefully go from retention of knowledge to retrieval, and then be able to turning retrieval into transfer into performance. These are some interesting things that kind of shoot out to me. I mean, obviously, we don't pay attention to boring things. If I'm not aware of it and I'm not paying attention to it, the rule is I probably won't be able to retain it, and I definitely won't be able to retrieve it. So in the design of our solutions, we need to be thinking towards how do we make that connection, that engagement, and thinking through how do we gather that attention. Everything from either creating the space to learn, to be focused, to move away from multitasking, to how do I vary the media or the ways in which you're expressing information through visual, movement, audio, all those kind of things, and doing those with an intentionality to drive towards engagement and attention. Short-term memory, the important is to repeat to remember. The more you get into your short-term memory, the more you do it, the more likely to have it in your short-term memory. The long-term memory is you've got to engage over a period of time, not just see the information, but connect with it. And so the remember to repeat is really getting into how do you integrate that knowledge nugget into that for retrieval for long term. Sensory integration, more of the senses, if I can bring in, not only the sense of sight, but also the sense of motion, tactile. The more you can connect the senses, the more you're going to be able to do that. Bringing audio, well-intentioned design with that, the more you're going to engage them. And then vision. Vision trumps all other senses. This is one instance that we tend to have a lot more of a visual connection with things, and vision is an important way that we do assimilate information. And I think most folks would say that that makes a lot of sense, but it's also coming back to say that when we put things forward, we can definitely talk about them verbally. We can also write about them in text, but some of the best ways to drive a connection is to bring in visual elements to it as well to reinforce it. And again, it's blending it into that design to not only get more of the senses, but it is critical to use vision or visuals in your designs. So again, a lot of what we're seeing here, I think, aligns with a lot of adult learning practices, which I think many of us have heard about over the, the recent 10 years for sure, and things we should be. But the nice part is we're getting more reinforcement to do some good practices. Another one here is a model for design learn events, and just to be clear, obviously I didn't write this, I didn't invent this. This comes from David Rock and the other folks here, and learning that lasts through the ages. And I recommend that if you want to learn more about them, definitely go out and connect with them, being able to learn more about this. I'll walk through a little bit of their model here, but they've got a 4-element of model around attention, generations, emotions, and spacing. So how do you kind of use these 4 levers to kind of drive towards your design to make it stick in a sense? So in this model, I want to kind of walk through this. So the first one we talk about is around attention. So bringing forth the design goal around attention is to create that maximum attention. You want to increase a focus on learner motivation, ensure that learners are focused during their learner events, and then utilize more novelty and variation. But I think the element with this is to make sure that it is relevant to what you're trying to do. Not just sticking in things that it's like, I have no idea why that's there. If I'm talking about something serious, why would I have a random picture of a clown, unless there's a very good reason for bringing that picture into what you're doing. Just random imagery to reinforce that is not going to be effective, but it's in that design to use a variation of imagery and things that are kind of jogging the brain to get it out of its rhythms, to look at something new, to create more of those handles for retention. The relevant studies around this, and this is just 3, but there are others that kind of bring some things into it. And for example, the first one is around multitasking, and this is from 1995, but it's identified as, a person who's interrupted takes 50% longer to accomplish a task, and that person makes up to 50% more errors. And I think from a design standpoint, as we create things that can sometimes be more passive, and like, for example, taking a WBT and having it, being able to take it in your workspace, but having it completely narrated for you, creates the space for that learner to, while they're listening to the course, they're also over there answering emails, responding to a text, somebody pops into their workspace, they have a conversation, but all the while in the background, the course is kind of just passively playing through that. So from a design standpoint, what we want to know is that not only are we trying to engage them and pull them into the experience, make it less passive, but also remove the space for multitasking or away from the focus of the learning. Some other data here, we're talking about the hippocampus is not engaged when attention is divided, and multitasking results in neurons decreasing firing, and hence learning decreases significantly. So these were, again, brought together and talking about the need for attention. And again, designing and bringing into your designs, your blended solutions, but focusing on making sure that you're getting that motivation, that connection, they're created a space to learn the new elements, and making sure that you're not just falling into a presentation rhythm that allows them to kind of fall into a sense of passive reception. The next one to take a look at would be generation, which I added on here is more about ownership, and this is about the opportunity to generation of learning by driving that learner ownership. How do they make it their own? And so the key to optimizing learning and long-term memory is to create that ownership is one of the studies, and also they may gain greater value if presented with data, then asked to formulate, organize, or add personal experience to the learning content. So not only being presented with a concept, but asking the learner to think through how that applies to them, make it relevant to them, think through applying it to their personal experience, sharing a personal story. Those ways are set from just receiving data of a presentation, but allows them to begin to own the story, tie it to their personal connections, and if you're able to do that, it can lead to increased retention, retrieval, and hopefully down the road when they need to perform, they can actually transfer towards that. So that gets back to really making sure that they are having the opportunities and the design of the activities to get their hands on the information and put it into their context and better understand it. The next one looks at emotions, and this one is really particularly, when I was reading about this one, I was excited because I have a background in experiential learning. So I worked with designing experiences around ropes courses or things that take folks out into the events, challenge-based learning from a variety of ways. But around that, there was a lot of the philosophy under those kind of training events or learning experiences around tapping into that emotional connection with the learners, but also the participants, and really give them an opportunity to be challenged, but have success, create a positive learning experience with that. So creating opportunities to gain positive feedback around the learning, within the learning, and integrate it, and then connect deeply with others on that topic, the opportunity to dialogue around it, think through actively with it. And obviously these are not all discrete in a design approach, but they would actually go back and forth. So emotions and ownership have a lot of interplay, at least from my perspective. So being able to, and this is where coaching and mentoring, from my opinion, provide a lot of great ways for you to be able to do that, to not only connect deeply with others, but if the coaching or mentoring is set up right, to get positive feedback on the things that they're doing. And I think that's one element under here. An additional line item that I would be thinking about is just managing the concept around stress, around learning, because having a challenge and being tested is different from what I would consider unnecessary or negative stress. And sometimes you've got to think about in your designs, are you bringing in unnecessary stress into the environments? Are you creating the opportunity to practice and get more information in a positive area? Now, that doesn't mean you're not creating the opportunities to go through, have difficulty, even fail, but get feedback in the learning context to do that, like simulations and some of those things. Those are great ways, as long as you're setting up that feedback and that connection, to ultimately result in a positive experience. And the next one is around spacing, and so this is one I think that ties to a lot of things that is now, I would say, a common best practice, but thinking about, rather than the old sheep dip method where we bring someone in and we put a lot of content, hit them with thousands of slides, first thing in their performance experience, and then 6 months from now they may actually expect to perform it. We know that dumping them in tons of content and away from the point of performance doesn't really yield high likelihood that they'll be able to ultimately perform that down the road. So thinking about ways to put it into smaller, more palatable chunks, disperse it over time, focus on the repetition of both testing and the content. So not only as you get more repetition and exposure to, it's not just repeating the content, but also getting them to repeatedly engage in it, commit to a thought, and drive forward with that. So that repeated testing is something that was kind of came to me new, and I think in some of the designs we would go through, it was natural to do that, but making sure that we found unique creative ways to do that. And I think it's where an interesting way of gaming is an interesting technique that allows us to get content out there, repeated over time, but in an engaging way that allows them to commit to a concept and get feedback on how they're performing. So I think gaming is an interesting way for that reinforcement approach with that. So again, this is just a model, and as I said, this was a model that was David Rock and those folks came up with, and they talked talk well about in the materials. It's an approach to design instructions, and of course, with only 20 minutes, there's no way to do it, what I would say, true justice to the entire depth of it. But at a high level, this is a model, again, to approach on the design and how we think through things. But of course, I think the real question is, so okay, we look at some of the concepts. You have 5 moments of learning need, social learning strategies, performer or learner-centric design, and then neuroscience and brain-based learning. When we have all these things in here, are we saying that we substitute one for the other? And I think as designers and developers of instructional or performance support systems, I think a lot of these things definitely help us inform our designs. And in my opinion, it's not you do one without an awareness of the other. In many ways, I think they reinforce each other and can bring some great things forward. So in my opinion, it's not an either or, it's an and conversation. And again, you need to think of it as you apply it, what makes sense as you're driving through. Take a look at the data, explore more on the theories that are underneath of these, and then that kind of brings you into your design cycle, and it helps you make the most informed design decisions. But in the end, really, how do you know you're going to be successful? And I cannot underscore the importance of actually evaluating the efficacy of your solutions by measuring. So you go out there, even at the end of this, with the design approaches you're going to do, I always recommend that you're either through a formative evaluation or a post-launch summative evaluation. How effectively did your design work with your target audience? So I know we're right near the end of our time, but as we kind of go through and we look at how do these approaches come in, what are approaches that we can bring into our design, balance that with great design and gathering great data to see how they're working in your performance environments with your target learners and performers, and have that healthy data feedback to make those changes as you move forward. So, Kayla, I know that kind of brings us to us. That was 100 miles an hour through this, but in closing, I want to encourage you guys to go out there and learn more about it, explore all the perspectives of this, and bring it into your designs.
Thanks, Matt. That was great. That was certainly probably the most content we've ever been able to cover in about 20 minutes. So we appreciate your insight. In fact, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but as we're sitting here, I'm thinking this is lending itself to a much longer and more detailed conversation. So during the evaluation at the end, if those of you who are on the call you want to put your inputs on what you'd like to hear more about, we might be able to snag Matt maybe for a 45-minute session. So again, Matt, don't mean to put you on the spot, but hopefully that's something that we can cover in the future. And so anyways, there's obviously more information to discuss, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it to this last slide so that everyone can see his contact information. Or Matt, if you don't mind going ahead and flipping it to the last slide. And if you do have a question for Matt, be sure to put it into the Q&A module at this time. At the end of the session today, we will be putting together a compilation of all the questions that came in, and Matt will be putting together a blog post to include the key takeaways and any answers that we're unable to take care of. We are over by a little bit, so I do appreciate those of you who can stay on the line for some Q&A. Also, as a reminder, the recording and the slides from today will be sent to the email address that you provided. And so it does look like we do have a few questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and start feeding these to you, Matt, if that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the first question is, let's see. Sorry, there's a lot of thank yous in here to filter through, so that's great. How does stress affect learning from a brain-based perspective?
Oh, wow. The short answer is stress does have an impact, and there's a range of studies out there, but there is what I'm seeing from most of this, and granted I'm not the end-all be-all expert, but I would definitely look into more of it. But what we do find is that there is a sweet spot with a minimum amount of stress that requires, and that gets back into attention and focus, but you can also reach a state of overstress. So if there's a complete lack of stress, and by definition there's a lot of things we can call what stress is, but there is in general, folks are saying that there is a sweet spot around a minimum level of stress for both performance and learning that goes into it. Now, that's a very broad, sweeping statement, but it does have an impact with it. I mean, even if you were to just look at the concept of test anxiety in and of itself related to performance on a test is how you might measure somebody being able to do that. Just from a performance standpoint, test anxiety does play a role in how people perform, and that's on the ability to retrieve or fill out, a form correctly. But if you're thinking that if you're having that kind of same on the retrieval side, you probably would have that impact on encoding it or retaining it. So again, there's much broader research on there. It's not, the answer is a little simplistic, but I think there is a much deeper thought about that. And there is a lot more that folks are looking around stress for learning and stress and performance.
Great. I love this one because this is actually one that I was thinking myself. Which book would you start if you haven't read any of the ones that you recommended?
Oh, wow. Wow, that's a really good question.
I think on it, you can always throw it in your blog post too, but we'll figure.
Yeah, I'll put it in my blog post with that one, and the reason why I say that is each one of them takes a slightly different journey point. So for me, when I read them in the order I read them in, I kind of built my understanding as I went through them and exposed to more of them. I recommend, honestly, go to Amazon, take a look at the table of contents. You can see, I believe, an example of some of the content and the accessibility style. So I would recommend kind of just exploring them and then pick one and dig in with it. I think they're all good starters, and within that you'll even see others that kind of come through with that as well. So each of them answers a slightly different approach or way they're connecting with the reading audience. So it's a hard one for me to answer.
That's perfectly fine. We'll give you some time to think on it. I think that's a great answer. So we've got about 10 more, so I'm going to go ahead and choose 2 or 3 more, so I apologize if we don't get to your question. We'll be sure to follow up with Matt's answers in our blog post, but the next one is one of the first that came in. Do you think that it's always true that number 10, vision trumps all, and I think this is referring back to John Medina's rules?
Do I think that vision always, well, first of all, I don't think anything always is always. So I don't think, but I do think that we sometimes in our designs, as we speed to either address bandwidth or building constraints or design constraints, we start to jettison some of those critical elements of bringing visual elements back into what we do. So how do I take 3 paragraphs of text and convert it to an infographic which may yield a better understanding? There's an effort around that. I think it's less that it's always true that it trumps everything. What I think is, for me, I'm taking away from it is that we need to reinforce that it's more important to our designs, and we need to make sure that we work and put that effort into our designs more regularly than we do. There are lots of what I'd say design and development constraint factors which start pushing away from that. We start to go to more text or thinner pieces, and we don't think about bringing in that visual component. So I don't think it's always true, but I think it is an important component, and we do need to have it into the designs, and a well-crafted visual that reinforces the message is not easy to do. Expressing a concept or elements within a visual is challenging, but when it's done well, can have a high impact.
Great. Definitely keep your questions coming in. We'll be sure to address them in the blog post. But I'm going to go ahead and just do one more and wrap up because we, at this point, are going to be about 10 minutes over. The recording and slides, just to remind everyone, will be sent to you to the email address that you provided when you registered. So then the last question I'm going to get to is, what is the impact of culture on brain-based learning?
Wow. Oh, that's a great question, and honestly, I don't feel that I have an answer that would be extremely valid. I mean, I could give you a guess that I think it plays a very important role within it, but I do think that some of the basic fundamental things we talk about have played out. I mean, I think the role of visuals to communicate information is across many cultures. So being able to convey information and reinforce content in a construct, I think, for example, that would hold true across cultures. But I think there are cultural actual facts that do play into this, which gets back to reinforcing that it's not down to the element of an algorithm. You just do A plus B plus C and it rolls out, and it's going to work in every culture everywhere. So I suspect culture has an impact and should have an impact in your design considerations. What I don't know is I don't necessarily have a research or study that backs that up, but that's my guess or hypothesis.
Great. Well, your insights are always appreciated. So without going into any more of the questions, I apologize again if we didn't get to yours. They will be followed up with. I do want to say thank you again to today's speaker, Matt Donovan, and thanks to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for our next Learning Trends webinar. It will be on augmented learning, reality or myth. This will be on January 21st. That's a week from today at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. For GP Strategies, I'm Kayla Rotz, and I wish everyone a great day.